What's up, Joe?
Matthew, what's up, man? How you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm excellent. Um, let's see. I'm not getting an image yet.
Let me activate that. Here we go.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
There I am.
All right, cool, man. Hey, what's up? Nice to meet you.
Dude, great to meet you. Love your show. Excited to
Thank
be
you.
here.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. Yeah. So, where are you located?
I'm in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Okay, right on. Yeah, North Carolina's been popping up on my radar quite a bit. I hear it's really lush out there. It's just people say it's so green, you don't understand green till you've been there.
It does have a unique color palette, definitely. I've noticed even a bit of a difference from city to city. It's also well known for the pollen, and
Yeah.
but yeah, weather is generally great. People do move here for the climate pretty
Right
often.
on. Right on. What's your area known for?
It's known for Fort Bragg,
Okay.
which now called Fort Liberty. So that kind of defines the local population. I like it's got kind of a historic vibe, which is cool,
Yeah.
and it's just a low key place to live. I'm pretty happy here.
That's cool. The thing that's interesting about America, especially when you go to Europe and you go to other places, those places are drenched in history. So when you can get to a place in the States that has that history to it, because you have all these little small towns with downtowns and they have a long history, Civil War kind of thing. But I'm glad you said history because there's something charming about that in America when you feel that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you mentioned Europe. They do a great job generally of preserving that, and sometimes it gets lost, in the just I don't know retail space and everything that visually pollutes
Yeah.
certain cities. So I came from Northern Virginia, so I've seen a lot of that too, where it's like, man, I can't even tell what this place was
Yeah.
before, but you know, it's it's the way things go, I guess.
Absolutely, it is. So let's get into modern living here. And the first thing before we get into your life as an author and a podcaster is surviving COVID. The last 3 years really did a thing on all of us. How did you get through it? And how has it changed the way that you do things now?
Oh man, that was an interesting time in my life with or without a pandemic. I was living and working around my alma mater, which was a conservative Christian school. At that time, I went back there to podcast, to work, to take some classes, and there was kind of a growing divide ideologically between where I stood and probably the norm there. But I sort of wanted to challenge that and have people challenge me, and that was kind of part of my interest in being there. But I was also just in terms of professionally, I felt like if I wasn't able to achieve the things that I wanted to do on a professional level or things that inspired me or that were gratifying, I'd rather go the polar opposite and just be something very pious and humble. So I became a janitor, working full time as a janitor as COVID began. And it was really to me an interesting time. And I don't know if other people remember it this way, but I felt like there was this moment where um, dogmatically political people were still trying to figure out which side their respective parties were going to be on.
Yeah.
Like who was going to take what position. And so in a very conservative circle, there was this like, are we going to be the heroes of this thing, or are we going to resist and deny? And so there was a few weeks where that was just a very strange but fascinating dynamic to me. But ultimately, the janitorial staff, I can't believe I'm even talking about that, but it was just too interesting to look away. Like, took it very seriously, and at the same time, everyone was vacating the school, so we're cleaning all these empty buildings with this intensity, and it was kind of surreal. But at that same time, I had just completed a year-long documentary project that I knew was kind of going to be professional kamikaze, because I was calling out a lot of things, both to do with the university and the religious identity and the job itself, which was not the most professional thing to do, but I didn't care for my job that much anyway. So uh, I ultimately was fired in the sequence of events, stemming from that. And whether or not that had to do with it, well, I was trying to make a name for myself in other ways, as young people often do. I wanted to become, I wanted to leverage the chance to gain uh, some following online, right? Doing absolutely whatever I could. I was already a podcaster. I was like, let me try some other things. Let me make shorts. Let me make comedy, TikTok, whatever. And it became really depressing. I didn't handle myself well, and I'd always struggled with anxiety and depression, but it got really, really bad to where I wanted to die
Wow.
in the first few months of 2020, and uh, got to the point, after trying to just take every natural approach possible, where I was like, clearly I need to be medicated. I mean, there's just no way around this, and I'd really resisted that for a long time, but uh, shortly after I moved back from that school in Southern Virginia, I moved back to Northern Virginia, started medication, and that was it ended up completely flipping my life around. Like, I went from afraid of everything, including, panic attacks and all that. I had this fear of fear itself. Like, I was just immobilized. I didn't think I could hold down a normal job or anything, to almost frighteningly audacious, willing to try anything, able to do things, able to function very normally, and like shocked that that was the reality most people live in, I guess. And got a normal job, started dating, did, just everything,
Yeah.
but then sort of slipped into a different kind of funk. And life was just sort of a little monotonous. I was very content, but um, maybe it was what somebody who doesn't have clinical depression would call depression, where it was just like, I'm just coasting here. It did not help that I got about a bout of COVID that lasted for 5 or 6 months.
Wow.
I mean, not contagiously, but where the effects lingered
Sure.
for a very long time, kept me, mostly confined to work and home, just because I didn't have energy. I was in a bit of a brain fog, and I really wanted to start doing something productive. I'd already started, putting together notes I wanted to be writing, but just wasn't the most inspired, didn't have the most clarity, and eventually realized if I want to really, get moving again, uh, I might have to go off meds.
Right.
And so, there was a sequence of events eventually led me back to North Carolina. The COVID fallout cleared up, and then I started buckling down on writing, and found that that was more productive than, little one-off projects here and there. So a lot of stuff there you might want to dig
Yeah.
into, but
Yeah.
that was the last couple years of my life.
That's the basis. So when you were growing up, what did you want to be when you were a kid?
Well, I used the tagline inventor. That was how I summarized, that I wanted to be a creative person. And I was always very inspired by like picture books and stuff. So I'd seen a few inspirations. Rube Goldberg, in fact, the guy who made the cartoon drawings of these like chain reaction, very absurd, drawings. That was an inspiration for me. And I took it seriously enough that I would study materials from like the patent offices in DC to try to figure out exactly how I'm going to do it. When I had an idea, I would be very serious and clinical about it. So, um, I went from drawing up inventions like that would get a utility patent, and then eventually decided I wanted to open a theme park. I drew the whole theme park blueprints and everything. Of course, like every, young athletic boy, I wanted to be a professional athlete
Yeah.
in every sport. But I was always interested in writing as well. I did write a lot of short stories and poems and things like that as a kid, and that's the thing that never stopped. So even though there was never a point when, I was hired to do that, that was the thing that I always felt like, this is what I do. even in the stages of it where I didn't necessarily enjoy it, I was like, this is the thing that I feel like comes most naturally to me. So, I can grind out some writing in just about every format, but that creative energy that made me want to be an inventor, that's always there.
So if we kind of go back to more your beginnings, the memoir is about a comedic look at the spiritual underpinnings that you've gone through. Talk to me a little bit about how you finally got to a point where you put it in that context and made it into a memoir.
Yeah. So I I started compiling the notes and thinking through these ideas from the perspective of uh, my personal struggles with anxiety, with depression, and wanting to convey some of the uh, some of what has and has not worked for me. Not like a self help book in the sense that I know what frees you from these afflictions, because I haven't achieved that, but to try to you know give some meaningful insight. And it became clear as I looked through, as I thought through my personal history, like religion has played a major role in that. I mean, when I was a kid, I associated my anxiety exclusively with religion because it was themes from my upbringing in church that I would latch onto. I had very thematic anxieties. It was the opposite of generalized. It was based on very specific ideas, which ranged from, or I guess progressed from, the idea of death and eternity, and where does our soul go, which was answered in black and white terms: you go to heaven or you go to hell.
Yeah.
And then it became all too real when that was put in terms of, well, it might not actually wait until you die. There's going to be a rapture that might actually be coming very, very soon. The rapture referring to the second coming of Christ, where that everybody's to be judged then and there. And uh, just the idea of salvation was not a I didn't associate that with redemption from anything that I clearly felt I needed to be saved from, except hell. Right. So even if there was a lot of loving language around it, it didn't feel like a comforting, loving concept.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize that I had anxiety separate from that until like in my teens, when I had anxiety around other things, social anxiety and all of that. And it would still hit on really, really specific topics, but to me, that was my life was always framed around biblical, religious, spiritual ideas, at a very early age. So it's something that was and always has been running in the background, maybe the foreground in a sense. It's kind of like all I could think about while trying to have a normal childhood. Um, and the circumstances of my childhood were wonderful. I had a good, stable family life and all that, and friends. And I've talked about my homeschool education quite a bit, which was not a bad thing at all. It's unusual, but not bad. And but I realized, in talking to people, they find a lot of the stories and experiences from that really funny, and I like taking the comedic angle
Yeah.
to these things. I think that you can actually extract a lot of value from framing things in terms of just the humor.
Yeah.
Like, some of that stuff is hilarious just telling it. Some of it, I think I'm able to frame it in a way that at least makes heavy stuff a bit lighter.
Yeah.
And not for the purpose of like making it therapeutic or easy to hold down, but like because it is. And like you can highlight the contrast between things by focusing on what strikes at the core of it. That's what comedy does.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I enjoy that angle.
That's awesome. So who's been kind of a role model for you in your life? A hero?
I've had a lot. I've never like pinned it down to one person, but there's people who inspire me creatively, that I'll sort of go through phases of really modeling myself after, or at least my, my creative style after. When I was writing this book, someone who'd been very influential to me was the podcaster comedian Pete Holmes, because he wrote a book that approached his upbringing in a similar way, and he had all of those, so many of the same experiences, but most importantly, the same uh, mindset towards it, which really just reinforced that this is a common thing. Like there's a certain set of events or traits that can happen in someone's upbringing that produce this almost identical persona in adulthood. And he expressed it so well. And, he was just so lucid in the way he explained that in podcasts that followed it. And so, content with accepting the uncertainty in life. And that's a big theme for me, because everything was based around the idea of knowing for sure. When I was a kid, that was the common denominator of the struggle. And so so not only Pete Holmes, but others that inspired him have also inspired me, like Alan Watts. It's a bit of a more mystical figure.
Yeah.
And then there's the very rational figures, like Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens, not to go exclusively for atheists, but right. they helped to counterbalance a lot of the very religious side of my influences.
Who would be a dream guest that you would have on your show?
Well, the funny thing is, I I made a list of dream guests when I was living in Lynchburg, and I ended up getting to have two of them on. They were I'd heard these two guys, James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian, on Joe Rogan's show, and it was just fascinating. I'd never heard them before, never heard of them, and they were famous for the they called it the Grievance Studies Affair. It was this series of hoax academic papers that they wrote and submitted to journals just to see if the publications that are basically responsible for giving the approval of, like, this is citable academic work, if they would be hoaxed by something that just used a lot of the same kind of language but was fundamentally absurd. Yeah. And perhaps even totally counter to their values. So they were writing about preposterous things, quoting sources that should never be quoted in an academic journal, and submitted this stuff. And now they came from the position of, they were liberals trying to preserve their own party from eating its own tail, essentially, because they saw, like, they felt that the culture of not just cancel culture, but a lot of, there was a religious element, quite frankly, to the way that the left was operating in a not classically religious sense, but that there's like kind of they're creating rules that aren't democratic, that aren't actually applying critical thinking, and so they were trying to expose something that they thought was a threat to free thought, and they were somewhat successful in it. But they had some really good insights on other things too. We talked about religion quite a bit, and how that permeates all aspects of life. So they were, they were wonderful. I was in a very intellectual headspace at that time. I think now, if I kick off another show, I'd want to have more, just sit and shoot the breeze kind of conversations with funny people and entertainers and whatever. Bo Burnham, he's a big influence for me. He's a comedian who does a lot of, I love lyrics. He does a lot of lyrical stuff, and he did a special during COVID while I was also trying to dabble in comedy. He much more technically proficiently put together a special completely inside his own house that was an amazing look at manic creativity, I would say. Manic with a big taste of depression as well. And then he recently put out a special that was just like an even further inside look at that special, which I just love that. I love going behind the scenes of what makes, creators tick and do their thing.
Absolutely. So at this point in your life, what are you the proudest of that you've done?
Wow. On a personal level, that I continue to feel like I'm improving as a person, because there's been so many times that I was like, it's the most I can do is to simply survive. But somehow every every depression, I feel like I find a way to make the fire refining and to become better. But in terms of things that I've done, created, it's honestly, I like I like the smaller like video projects and things that I've done. Sometimes better than the stuff I've done in long form. Every time I spend years on something, I end up doing something in the aftermath of it that's just like a quick little ditty that I'm like, man, that's cool. Um, and that doesn't always correspond with what other people like, but I like that stuff. But I'm pretty proud of having written a book that I can stand behind, that I can say I really didn't cut any corners here, and I said what I meant, and it wasn't easy to say what I meant. Um, I knew that there was going to be some tough conversations to have, in the wake of that, and that it was going to ruffle some feathers. But I've lived my life honestly, and I think that's something to be proud of. That's something it doesn't always come easily. Even if you want to, it can be hard to really be honest with yourself. It takes a lot of thought, a lot of introspection, sometimes a lot of solitude, but I've managed to do that, I think.
So ultimately, at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, your readers, your fans, family, friends, but you are in control. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, I've said before that I think I'm kind of defined by contradiction, because whenever I get too comfortable in one thing, I sort of push back against that and try to develop other aspects of myself. I think the the value that's most important to me, like I said, is to be honest and transparent. I really I want to think of myself as somebody who articulates ideas well, um, who can speak to a person's needs, who can basically bring value anywhere. But at some point, it might be more beneficial to actually find my lane, and really pick what I am. It's kind of by necessity, I think, that I've been an all things to all people kind of person, but maybe that's a gift in itself. I'm a little undecided on that still, but I have a soft side, I have an intense side, and I try to nourish both. Um, but man, it's like you said, everybody has a different perception, and
Yep.
my own perception may not be more valid necessarily. Sometimes I'm deciding what I'm going to be on a given day. Am I going to sit down and write poetry, or am I, you know, going to present myself as some kind of hard ass? And like, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know. I go
Yeah.
through phases.
Yeah. Well, hey, if anyone wants to pick up the book or listen to the podcast, where can they go?
Yeah, so I have a SoundCloud, or Spotify, I guess is what that streams to. Just look me up by name on Spotify or YouTube, Matt Garnier. The book is on Amazon. It's also on the Spotify, but it is on Amazon as both a Kindle book and paperback. Swept Up: Lessons from the End Times. And
I
if you
love it.
just search "Swept Up," you'll get a lot of a lot of Hannah Montana results for some book that came out years ago. But use that subtitle, "Lessons from the End Times."
Right on, man. Matt, this has been great. Thank you for opening up. Best of luck with everything. I appreciate you taking time out today.
Joe, thanks so much to you, man. Keep it up.
Yes, sir. Take care.
All right.
Cheers.